So good day, everyone. I'm Jason Rosemurgy. I'm the Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Terso Solutions. And we are honored here today to have John Kilgore, a good friend of Terso and an expert in the pharmaceutical space, to be with us and talk about the pharmaceutical industry, especially as it relates to specialty pharma and the evolution that it's going through. John is the former National Vice President for Specialty Pharmaceuticals for a well-known large distribution organization, and is going to shed a little bit of insight on that evolution, technologies, how they're working, some of the changes that need to happen, some of the changes that are happening, I think, down the road that could play out. And collectively, I think we'll get to some good information and good idea sharing. So, John, welcome. I'll allow you to introduce yourself, and we can jump into some of the topics.
Great, Jason. Thank you. Well, I appreciate the introduction very much, and it's a pleasure to be with you folks today. And we're talking about one of my favorite subjects, and that happens to be specialty pharmacy. You're right. I was with a large distribution organization for on and off for 50 years, and it was the joy of my life to be able to participate in a variety of different functional areas during all those many years. The more recent years, of course, were spent, as you mentioned, in the area of specialty pharmacy. And so I had the opportunity to work with the new limited distribution products that are coming out. And those are just limited distribution as defined by the manufacturers, in that they like to have a very tight channel and they love to go through specialty pharmaceutical distribution. And within the specialty pharma areas, we also had a very active, flu vaccine areas, as well as, plasma derivatives. So, in my role throughout the years, I've been able to have the pleasure of managing very talented people in the field that would handle all aspects of specialty pharmacy. And prior to that, regular pharmacy in distribution, and in the early days, medical surgical distribution. So as I said, it's been the joy of my life to be able to be participating in all those different areas. So thank you.
Yeah, happy to have your thoughts on this interview. So let's dig into specialty pharma. I think it's important, kind of how the pharma space is evolving, and more so the specialty pharma space. And we've talked about this in the past. How do you really see that piece of the industry evolving, and where is it going over the next 5 years, in your opinion, really from a growth perspective and an importance perspective in the market itself?
Well, I think you used the right word, and the right word is growth. And so I would accentuate upon that and say growth, growth, and more growth. The really delightful thing about the growth in these specialty areas is that for these very, very specific disease states that exist out there today, there is help coming. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to play a part at Terso, within distribution and dealing with all of the constituents in the supply chain. New value is coming for patients in need. And so that's a really wonderful thing. And it's great that we all have the opportunity to participate in that. I think one thing to think about that I think about a lot is how the business has evolved already. We know that it's going to be evolving in the future even more with the advent of yet more products and, as I mentioned, very unique products. But for hospital pharmacies especially, when you look at a typical hospital revenue stream, or if you, let me liken it to hospital spend, if you will. Today, in most large organizations out there in the provider setting, greater than 50% of the spend is now spent on limited distribution drugs. Those are the specialty drugs that we talked about. Part of it are those plasma derivatives that we talked about that are so essential. Yeah. And there's been a bit of an evolution with regard to those, in that where they used to be handled in the blood bank almost exclusively, they're pretty much almost exclusively now being handled in the Department of Central Pharmacy. So when you look at that, that's quite a nice portion of the activity. But these, affectionately known as LDD or limited distribution drugs, uh, these go through a very specific supply chain, that includes specialty pharmacy. Distribution is one aspect, but certainly the way specialty pharmacy products are handled in the central pharmacy and as they're distributed out to patients, it's even much more specific than we've talked about. So when I think about growth, I think about that greater, almost $300 billion segment that we're looking at, soon to be 300 billion, just in those products, and a majority of those products are temperature controlled, and that's a very important aspect, to consider when we're thinking about specialty pharmaceutical products. The other thing to think about, and so I was just going to mention also that old 80/20 rule may still be in play. Um, and maybe we're approaching that in this sense. Perhaps 20 items make up 80% of the spend eventually. And I do think that will happen. Personal opinion. I also think that we shouldn't rule out the introduction of biosimilars into the marketplace. And biosimilars are going to cause us to look at the business differently. It'll cause providers to look at the business differently. But the one thing that we need to think about are budgetary, but I'll wait to talk about that until we move a little further.
Sure, sure. Maybe expand a little bit about, kind of the importance and maybe some of the associated challenges that'll come with, that growth, that specific growth in those core areas, cold chain products, all of that, and kind of maybe the traditional method, how it's set up to handle these sorts of products, and how you see that potentially needing to evolve, or processes needing to evolve around it.
Well, when you think about the basics in big pharmacy operations, um, it's essential to think about how many steps are taken during the day. How many redundant sets of activities are occurring during the course of the day? There are certainly resident systems that help to connect to the patient with some eventuality, but there are also contributing systems, RFID, track and trace, a lot of different systems that our providers have really come to rely upon. And so when I think about the expansion of growth, and I think about all of these new products that are coming out that are, temperature sensitive, for example, there are going to have to be new modalities put in place in order to house those products. Pharmacy is still pretty basic. Our providers out there still want to be able to turn the inventory efficiently. They still want to be able to manage out dates and expiration dates and such. They still want to be able to, be involved in managing, and I know we'll talk about this, the trials and tribulations associated with white bagging and brown bagging. But when you get right down to it, pharmacy operations are pretty basic. And what you'll find, not a lot of extra people hanging around in the pharmacy looking for things to do these days. Right. And so they're just as stretched as can be with people. They're just as stretched as they can be with budget, and with all of these new evolutionary things coming upon them. It's quite a concern as they continue to grow in serving the patient population.
Thank you, John. Let's talk about that example you brought up about white bagging and brown bagging. I think that's an important one,
Sure.
and kind of what that means, how that's come into play, and kind of how it's the introduction of that third party in the mix is throwing some challenges out there.
Well, it's kind of a hot topic right now. There are several very respectable groups around the country that are, grabbing this issue, wrestling with it, and figuring out how to handle white bagging. I took the opportunity, and if I may, and if you'll indulge me, to get a good definition. That'd be great. Brown bagging is when a patient acquires specialty medication from a pharmacy and takes it to the physician's office for administration. White bagging is when a physician receives a specialty medication from the pharmacy on demand, and the patient visits the physician's office for administration. So you can see there are two different streams there. White bagging, if you think about it this way, and if you put yourself in the shoes of a pharmacist, which I've done many times in my life, it's a little scary. I think when a patient is admitted and they're bringing their own products with them, all of those controls that the central pharmacy is still responsible for fall into place. Checking out dates, making sure the administration is done timely, making sure that if there are any changes, with regard to prescribing habits, all of those different things come into play, and much, much more. By the way, we could talk about white bagging all day long. I
Mhm.
think I think that the real concern is patient safety. And so when you think about white bagging and you think about the definitions that I talked about, I think you need to put patient safety first. And that, of course, is what pharmacies do. That's what they're good at.
Mhm.
That's what they
Yeah.
are poised to do. So I think you're going to hear a lot more about this issue around white bagging and brown bagging and the challenges. When we talk about challenges in pharmacy today, those are big challenges because where you used to have maybe one patient or two patients, now you have many patients that are engaging in that kind of activity, and it puts an extra challenge and burden on the folks that are running the pharmacy.
Let's stick on the specialty pharma market for a second, and something that I think we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and kind of the impact to manufacturers as you see it, and kind of their role in all of this, and the challenges that you know that growth may present all the way upstream to a manufacturer.
Well, I do think that manufacturers have their own set of challenges. I mean,
Hmm.
the one challenge that they wrestled with some years ago was going through many different distribution points across the country with many different distribution entities to settling it down to maybe just going through a few,
Hmm.
and with the expectation that there would be some white glove handling of
Hmm.
those products. Uh, Securing that supply chain, um, assuring that pedigree is really watched and really maintained well and really reported back well. Um, what is the most efficient way in which to get these, oftentimes, as we know, these high cost, very specially based from a disease state point of view products, to the patient on time, accurate, and complete. There has to be an awful lot of trust within the whole pipeline. But when you get to the patient level, things like was the medication administered on time? Were there any notable results, positive or negative? Are there any learnings that the manufacturer can get, from the administration ultimately at the point of administration to the patient? And are there more efficient ways to do things? And given the nature of what we've talked about earlier here today, with such a high population of products in cold chain, there have to be very efficient ways within the pharmacy to be able to support manufacturer expectations. And so I think when a manufacturer thinks about, gosh, how do I get this, to the central pharmacy? How do I best get it to the patient? How can I be sure that that product has been stored according to all of the different guidelines that we give? Have all of those things been fulfilled? And once that assurance is set, the trust is there between all of the partnerships all along the supply chain are assured. And most importantly, the patient is assured that they get the right product at the right time, and that it's helping them in the very best way that it can.